Rivers are highways that move on and bear us whither we wish to go. Before any road was made in this land, one of the first highways of history was the Hudson River, named for a valiant English captain sailing for the Dutch at... English captain? Great Scott! That's him. That's he. Say, Captain Hudson, hold everything. Oh, there's a chap who's really going to need a guided tour. Sir, Captain Hudson, sir, hold it. Don't throw that map away. Well, maybe it does seem a bit dated. You're in the right place, but look here, Captain. Why don't you come with us? We could retrace your old journey, you know, with a few excursions. I'm sure you can see some changes since you made your voyage 3.5 centuries ago. Having you along will help us get a better perspective. We'll follow the Hudson north. Then maybe we'll have a surprise for you. A meeting with a man you might have bumped into if you'd gone far enough. Remember when you sailed along the Atlantic coast and into the mouth of the river that you hoped was a water route to China? Your officer's logbook read, "This is a very good land to fall with and a pleasant land to see." But you know, Captain, another European saw this harbor before you did. The statue at Battery Park honors that Italian who was 12 years old when Columbus discovered America. Giovanni Verrazzano reached here 85 years before you, when he sailed his little ship, the Dauphine, through the Narrows to become the first white man, so far as it's recorded, to see this magnificent island.
We found a pleasant place between steep little hills. And from these hills, a mighty deep mouth river ran into the sea.
But the Dauphine and her crew and captain did not stay. They sailed away.
My intention in this voyage was to reach Cathay.
But your voyage, Captain Hudson, gave the Netherlands claim to all of this province which you entered. The Dutch sent Peter Minuit to the New World to make an historic purchase. This famous sale took place at the tip of the island near Bowling Green, the foot of Broadway. All of Manhattan for the price of a few blankets, kettles, and trinkets. $24 worth. This is the way the island looked, Captain, when you went ashore to powwow with the Indians. But even a handful of years after your voyage, New Amsterdam had already become a tight little town. A French missionary described it.
On this island of Manhattan and its environs, there may be 400 or 500 men of different faiths and nations, and men of 18 kinds of languages.
Director General Peter Stuyvesant built the stockade to protect the little settlement. And the stockade gave a name to one of the world's most famous streets. But after half a century of Dutch possession, the British appeared in the city demanding surrender of the Dutch colony. Stuyvesant protested, but the colonists were tired of his high-handed ways. They urged him to surrender. The colony of New Netherlands became the English colony of New York without the firing of a shot. Those men of 18 tongues and different faiths and nations did not find it difficult to accept new people. Planted by the Dutch, enriched by many nations, cultivated by Great Britain, the province began to flourish. Hamlets grew around the harbor and the river, farms, churches, homes, and schools. It was a saltwater civilization. Way back in 1696, they built this school on Staten Island. The people came from across the sea with some respect for education. Rich and poor, old and young, they were filled with a dynamic surge of life. A writer described the American character.
The early knowledge they acquire gives them a great degree of sagacity. They are all animated with the spirit of an industry which is unfettered and unrestrained,
Because each person works for himself.
Even more than the Dutch, the British loved the sea and trade, and traffic in the harbor and the river grew until the Hudson's mouth became a street of ships. The colony of New York had much in common with England. Both had an aristocracy of landlords and merchants. They depended on trade. But some in the colony had strong ideas about self-government, and soon differences with England began to show. By the mid-17th century, many New Yorkers itched for independence. One incident followed another, like those involving the Liberty Boys, until the first skirmish of the Revolution showed the heat beneath the surface. But war for New York would have a harsher meaning than elsewhere. New York had more loyalists than any other colony. When war began in New York City, mansions belonging to loyalists served as Patriot headquarters, and Patriot mansions served loyalists as the fortunes of war shifted, until at last the whole city was in the grip of the powerful mother nation across the sea. But at last the war was ended, and here at Fraunce's Tavern, all the stirring events became memories, stories to be handed down to sons and grandsons. This was General Washington's farewell to his officers.
With a heart full of love and gratitude, I now take leave of you, most devoutly wishing that your later years be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable.
General Washington was soon to become president of the new nation, in the same city where he had said farewell. The first Capitol, Old Federal Hall, stood on the spot on Wall Street. Here on a small balcony, our first president took his oath of office, while the crowd stood hushed in the streets of the new nation's first peacetime capital, New York City. The city began to grow into an empire on the sea. All paths led here, by ocean and by land. The trade goods of the world passed through this port to make New York the city where you could find everything. But this liquid highway of the New World bore more than ships and cargo. In the next century, it carried our great-grandfathers and our grandmothers from the four corners of the world through this front door of the United States. From here, some went to the prairies, some built new cities, some moved west, but millions made the front door home, with many more than 18 kinds of languages and different faiths and nations. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And yet, Captain Hudson, as you stand here at 40 degrees 53 minutes north latitude, do you still search for the fabled passage to the east? Let us show you how your great river of the mountains unlocked a continent, a whole new world. The land is the finest for cultivation that I ever in my life set foot upon, and it abounds in trees of every description. Not many winters after your voyage, Captain, roads were leading to the Hudson from idyllic spots along its shores, where an old world life was soon transplanted to the new. Though the Dutch brought their ways to the valley forged a new character for them, the character of the Hudson Valley pioneer. At some spots in your valley, Captain, time truly stands still. The old ways are still to be seen by those who visit Phillipsburg Manor at Tarrytown, even preparations for a Dutch celebration of St. Nicholas Day. A visitor to the Dutch province commented on the division of labor.
The men scarcely ever labor, except to provide some game, either fowl or other description, for cooking, and then they have provided everything.
Many generations after the first Dutch settlers in the valley, a man came to live here who would make those New York Dutch immortal. His name was Washington Irving.
About 25 miles from the ancient and renowned city of Manhattan, on the eastern bank of that expansion of the Hudson, known among Dutch mariners of yore as the Tappan Zee, stands a little old-fashioned stone mansion, all made up of gable ends and as full of angles and corners as an old cocked hat.
This charming house near Tarrytown on the Hudson was the home of America's first great man of letters. It was Irving's fancy that invented Rip Van Winkle and Ichabod Crane, Brom Bones, and Father Knickerbocker.
My sanctum sanctorum is the chamber once honored by the illustrious Diedrich, and it is from here that I pen this rambling epistle.
Irving's beloved Sunnyside, faithfully restored today, welcomes visitors all year round, and especially to its Christmas preparations, just as it did in Irving's time.
My heart dwells in this blessed little spot, and I really believe that when I die, I shall haunt it. But it'll be a good spirit that no one need be afraid of.
Then other dwellers in the valley left their mark. And when you travel the highways of the Hudson today, you're sure to see scores of houses, like the Roosevelt home at Hyde Park, in the style that architects of 100 years ago called Hudson River Gothic, or Jigsaw, or Bracketed. What was once high fashion in the valley today has mellowed into gentle antiquity. Some looked upon the Hudson as another Rhine, a glorious river that should be rimmed with castles and mansions. They are here now in the valley, all kinds, all sizes, some beautiful, some odd, but all express the individuality of 19th century New Yorkers. Today, some are private, but some will welcome visitors. And there were people who built their houses with 8 sides, the ideal shape for a house, said Orson Fowler. His home for all, the Octagon House, was widely copied in the Hudson Valley in the years before the Civil War. One farmer even figured his cows would be better off with 13 sides around them. But before the valley was secure for peaceful dwelling, much blood was spilled. Plots went awry. Heroes and villains were made, especially in the area of West Point. Because of the river, New York had always been the heart of colonial strength in the north. New York ought to be looked upon as the capital province, or the citadel to all the others. This part of the Hudson was a special citadel to the rebels in the Revolutionary War. To prevent passage of British ships upriver, a chain of heavy iron links was stretched at this point across the Narrows on a boom. Some of the links may still be seen at West Point. It was one of these links that the trader Arnold had removed when he plotted to sell West Point to the British. A link that was not broken was that forged by the New York State Senate, which met at Kingston, New York's first capital. Though burned out, pursued, or fired upon, the rebels fled to meet again, and fled and met again, until the enemy was gone. The Senate House today remembers all those days of tribulations. At West Point, on high ground bordering the Hudson Plain, a chain of forts and redoubts was built by the Americans, the strongest of which was Fort Putnam. Another fortification was at Stony Point. After it was captured by the British, American General Mad Anthony Wayne took it back again. Scaling the heights in the dark of night and wounded himself, General Wayne stormed the ramparts, carried on the shoulders of his own Continentals in a deadly bayonet charge. The British made no further attempt to attack West Point or break the chain. In spite of all the years of fire and sword, some places went unscathed and slumbered in quiet stone beauty for centuries, like Huguenot Street in New Paltz. But hands were always busy, Captain Hudson, during those years after your voyage. And today, the land which looked so fine to you so long ago bears out its rich promise. Your ship, the Half Moon, Captain Hudson, could not pass the spot where Albany, the oldest settlement in the 13 colonies, now stands. The channel is deepened today so that freighters from foreign lands may run up the Hudson to this inland seaport. Within a few years after you stopped here, Dutch-built Albany had become the key to the defense of the colonial frontier.
Albany is the dam which, should it through neglect be broken down by the enemy, we dread to think of the calamities that would follow thereupon.
Today, those who visit Albany's old Schuyler Mansion, where revolutionary history and legend were made, never tire of hearing the adventures of the patriot Schuyler family. During the war, several attempts had been made to kidnap the rebel General Schuyler. One evening in 1781, another attempt was made, while the house was unguarded. After a slave had given the alarm, young Margaret Schuyler followed her father, the general, and the rest of the family upstairs. No one knew whether there might be 2 Tories or 20. And then Margaret remembered. In the excitement, one member of the family had been left downstairs, her baby sister. There, wench. Where's the master of the house? Where's the general?
He's gone for help. The house will be surrounded in a minute. Ah! Oh.
The Schuylers all escaped, but today the mark of that tomahawk on the banister, worn smooth by generations of fingers, is a tangible reminder of America's early struggle for liberty. Here, Captain, at Albany, you finally were certain that the Hudson would not lead you to a northwest passage. You weighed anchor and sailed south to the sea again. But if you had continued north, using smaller boats and portage, you might have followed to its source, the Hudson, in the Adirondack wilderness. Today, the wilderness is crossed with trails. If we wish, we may take any of 100 routes, by water or by land, to track the story of the past in these wild and beautiful mountains. But most of this land was to remain unseen by white men for a century after your voyage. Except for this little animal, the beaver, and the pursuit of his golden fleece by hunter and trapper, the North Country might have been unknown even longer. For 2 centuries, the fur of animals like the beaver furnished the bait at the end of the trail. Wars were fought over the beaver's skin. His image was on New York's flag. history rode on his back. The wealth of the virgin forests also meant new trails and rails would come. For wood from Adirondack trees furnished lumber and power, made paper for the world, and even fired furnaces for making steel from Adirondack iron. Roads were cut to reach this precious ore, and iron more than once from Adirondack mines had given military strength when it was needed most along this natural route from Canada to Albany and south. For 100 years, this lake, Champlain, was red with blood, English, American, French, and Indian. Here and south beyond Lake George lay the battleground for a continent. Forts marked the way with majesty and terror. Ticonderoga, Crown Point, William Henry, Mount Defiance, Saratoga. Time and again the pattern was followed. Use the valley as a path to empire. The last attempt was in our brief and foolish war with England, the War of 1812. A great and decisive engagement of this war occurred in Cumberland Bay on Lake Champlain. The Kent de Lord House at Plattsburgh was occupied by officers of the British headquarters. The British Army held half the town. In full view of the house, the American fleet was anchored across the narrow channel of Cumberland Bay. Its commander, Lieutenant Thomas MacDonough. The British fleet with 16 ships was sailing down the lake. On land, a British army marching 7,000 strong outnumbered the Americans 2 to 1. By anchoring the American flagship so that it could swing around to bring the port guns to bear, Lieutenant MacDonough defeated the British fleet in a fierce and bitterly contested battle. When the British fleet withdrew, the land forces under Sir George Prevost also beat a retreat to Canada. Without the lake, the Champlain Valley would be useless to the British. British and Americans who died in the engagement, including the valiant British commander Downey, were buried side by side. The heroism of MacDonough and his flagship, the Saratoga, have been remembered in stone. Even the war between the states left a strange memorial in the Adirondacks. From his farm near Lake Placid, John Brown went south to Harper's Ferry to end up on trial for his life for his half-mad scheme. But John Brown came back, not to farm, but to rest forever in his stony acres. After the Civil War, the railroads began to carry people to places once impossible to reach. The hum of rails and the locomotive whistle drowned out the echo of the musket and the tramp of marching feet. The battleground was changing to a playground. It was then the Adirondack Hotel came into being. And the Adirondack Guide and Guideboat came into their full glory. In the Adirondack camp, even the ladies discovered the thrill of a random scoot or a bit of bushwhacking on the side of a trailless mountain. Some came for health, like Robert Louis Stevenson, to the cottage in Saranac where he wrote during a long, cold Adirondack winter. Presidents of the United States came here to relax too, and one came here to die, Ulysses S. Grant. In a cottage near Saratoga, barely able to hold a pencil, he finished writing his memoirs, then laid down his pencil forever. No battle campaign was conducted more bravely than the bearded general's last stand against death at the house on Mount McGregor, kept exactly as it was the moment that he died. As the years passed over the mountains and the valleys, they brought changes. the crude hunting lodges and camps gave way to more elegant accommodations. Cruisers and speedboats followed in the wake of canoe and guideboat. The land of the upper Hudson was becoming one of the world's favorite playgrounds. Yet the hunters and the fishermen still came, lured by the wildlife that had made this the favorite hunting ground of the Iroquois. The men with rod and gun and bow still look with wonder at the white on white face. The legend says this mark is the imprint of a great white stag felled by an Indian brave's silver arrow. On the peak was the abode of the Great Spirit. Speaking of the past then, Captain Hudson, although your journey ends, you've come full circle back to the beginning. For here was the beginning in the north. Look hard and well at this place, and this man whose footsteps were thunder in the New World, a soldier and discoverer of the lake that bears his name, Samuel de Champlain. Champlain's first act here, Captain, shaped history. In that same year that you sailed up the river, Champlain started south from New France, his Indian companions on the warpath. When they met their enemies, the Iroquois, the shot that Champlain fired in their midst shook the Adirondack Hills and echoed through the centuries. Now, if Champlain had continued in his exploration south, when he arrived at Albany, you'd certainly have met in 1609, had either of you dreamed the other there. But since you didn't meet in 1609, at least you can today. And now you'll have no need to quarrel for empire. This is the Empire State, part of the USA. On our highways of history, Henry Hudson and Samuel Champlain, there's room for both of you.